Okay, so in the last few days, ever since the Westminster attack, I've been doing research on terrorism in Great Britain. Just Great Britain, not Northern Ireland, because simply so many attacks in Northern Ireland that take up too much time. This is not exhaustive research, it's just kind of bullet points um, to get an idea of how this country compares to other countries and so on. I've just always been interested in that sort of. I guess goes back to my journalism days. When I studied journalism at university, I never really went forward with that, but I've always had that interest in these things. Um, I want to talk really about specifically. I've spoken a lot about Islamism, but I want to talk specifically about the provisional IRA campaign here in the British mainland. Obviously, the bad old days of the Troubles are, for the most part, over. The situation is not ideal. There is still an undercurrent of sectarianism. These days are fragile because of the breakdown in Stormont. I don't think it will return to the Troubles. I don't think anyone in Northern Ireland really has the motivation for that on either side, except a few hardcore people. But that's the good news. But when I look at old news reports of the IRA mainland campaign, one thing runs through those comments, and that is that you get people condemning it, but you also get a disturbingly large number of people, Irish Republicans, quite possibly a few British sympathisers as well, actually glorifying and condoning these attacks. Now, let's be clear, they always use the pretext of being freedom fighters. Anyone who's looked at the history of Ireland knows it's a long and complex history. The IRA always said they were freedom fighters. And I am absolutely, when I talk about the Troubles, I've always been candid that it's not black and white. There were wrongs committed by the British government, and there were terrible things done by the loyalist paramilitaries as well. I'm not making any, I'm not whitewashing that. But it frankly disgusts me when I see people saying things like, I've just read a comment, one guy saying, when the Brits are out of Ireland, the bombs stop. Now, let's be very clear about the mainland campaign. What were the targets? Certainly there were military targets. More often than not, they were not even active military. In one case, in the Deal bombings, the young cadets who were killed were not active servicemen, they were just cadets. They were musicians. Um, if we look at the long and depressing list of IRA atrocities, the Birmingham pub bombings, 21 civilians killed. How the hell, in any rational sense, did that further the objective of getting freedom for Ireland? And it was just, we're rightly concerned about Islamism today, but there isn't the same frequency of Islamist attacks. I think the reason why the Westminster attack got so much coverage is because it was the first large scale attack in 12 years. But from the 70s to the early 90s, it was just one incident after another, sometimes with only weeks between them. I was too young to really remember this firsthand. I was only a child at the time, but I can imagine this must have caused real anger and consternation in the public, and I've no doubt that was their agenda. Um, Thankfully, a lot of the attacks were not successful insofar as they've done more damage than killed people, but there were a lot of people killed, a lot of people injured as well. Um, and the targets, like I say, were not just military targets. They bombed pubs, they bombed shopping centres, um, banks, financial centres. The idea was to completely terrorise society. Now, people might say, oh, why are you talking about this now, Nathan? It's the past. I think there are still a lot of people in the Irish Republic and in Northern Ireland who have Republican sympathies who still cannot grasp Why they utterly lost the moral argument. There are also people around the world who hate the British for one reason or another, who, support the Irish Republican narrative. One thing that's always troubled me about the popular narrative of Northern Ireland is it's always romanticised the IRA. These people were nothing but bloody terrorists. That's what they were. A freedom fighter does not target civilians. And that's what they done. I mean, how does blowing up pubs in any way further the cause of United Ireland? The historian Ruth Dudley Edwards, who's Irish, made a very good point. She said the IRA mainland campaign set back a United Ireland by generations because all it done was stiffen the resolve of the British public. It deepened hatred within Britain, within the loyalist side of the conflict, and within Ireland. I mean, this is one thing that's often forgotten. These cyber warriors who present them as great heroes completely ignore the fact the Irish government considers these groups or considered these groups as terrorist organisations because they recognised that if there was ever to be a united Ireland, it had to be from one nation state to another. I think it's possible that there will be a united Ireland in my lifetime, but if that comes about, it will have nothing to do with the IRA campaign from the 70s to the 90s. It done fuck all. All it done was create a great deal of misery and terror. It didn't do a damn thing to further their good cause. And I admit I feel very angry when I see people glorifying them as freedom fighters. When you look at the list of attacks, sure, some of them were aimed at military targets, some of them were aimed at political targets. Not that I think that's a justification, because another narrative that the Republicans have always had is Brits out of Ireland, and it's this stubborn mentality they've always had against the unionist community. Now, without doubt, there was anti-Catholic prejudice on the loyalist side. I have no doubt about that, and there were, horrible things done by loyalist paramilitaries like the Shankill Butchers. So I'm not downplaying that, but one fault the Republican side has always had is never ever understanding the unionist community, never understanding that they aren't English invaders who came yesterday. We're talking about generations and generations of people who feel in their soul they are British citizens. So I believe there are fundamental moral flaws on both sides of the argument. But I'm convinced that mainland campaign, thank God it's over. But, the thing is, for reconciliation, I think what's hard to stomach for a lot of people is that these killers got out of jail because of the Good Friday Agreement. Now, that was a very difficult decision the Blair government took. And incidentally, similar things are going on today in Colombia. President Santos is having to go through controversial peace talks with the FARC rebels. Same situation. They've been responsible for countless civilian deaths and injuries, and many Colombians feel angry about that. But I just feel sick when I see the cyber Celtic warriors online praising the IRA as freedom fighters. In many cases, these people are too young, they're younger than myself, to have lived through that time, to have understood what their heroes were actually doing. I do think there's a big difference between that mainland campaign during the Troubles and, for example, the Irish War of Independence. Very different situation. In fact, I saw an interesting interview. I can't remember if it was McGuinness or Gerry Adams on Irish television having a rather heated debate about the original IRA versus the modern IRA of the Troubles. And they actually attacked, I think it was Gerry Adams, actually attacked Southern hypocrisy. So there's actually a disconnect, and this was something I wasn't that familiar with, between the Northern Republicans, that is, those who live in Northern Ireland, and Irish Republicans. And the thing is, with or without Brexit, the United Kingdom and Ireland are sister nations. We're going to have close trading relations. And it may well be that there will be a United Ireland in my lifetime. One thing the Scottish Nationalists have never done, at least nowhere near the same extent, is use violence to get their ways. Now, I'm no fan of the SNP or Scottish nationalism, but at least they understand that terrorism won't get them what they want. And quite possibly they've learned that from the Irish experience. What I would say to international viewers, wherever you are, do not look at this through the prism of what you think you know from Irish Republican propaganda. Because the people they were killing were not just soldiers and politicians. And again, I don't, I'm not downplaying that either, because I've just read, for example, 1992, 3 police officers shot in North Yorkshire. They weren't even armed. They weren't warriors of the British state. They were just doing routine traffic checks. And a lot of young soldiers were killed for no other reason than showing loyalty to their country. They didn't torture Catholic civilians. That's what disgusts me about a lot of the retrospect on this, is this vile exoneration of what the IRA and other Irish terrorist groups done. And I have no problem using the word terrorist, because that's what a terrorist does. They try to inflict violence within the community to instill fear in the wider community. Now, they will constantly talk about Bloody Sunday, but consider the amount of coverage that Bloody Sunday has got, which is substantial, compared to any number of IRA atrocities. And again, I'm well aware the loyalist paramilitaries were also guilty of atrocities. But the fact remains, over half of all those killed in the Troubles were at the hands of Irish Republican paramilitaries. And, thank God this is the past. But there are people to this day, right now, these Celtic online warriors who think, I just can't comprehend their mindset. These are people who would praise ISIS. If ISIS attacked Britain, they would praise ISIS. Not necessarily because they share Islamic fundamentalist ideas, but because they're so consumed by hatred of the British state. And they're so warped in their thinking that they cannot rationalise that terrorism never, ever achieves its objectives. Never. You look at any example around the world, it does not work. Look at South Africa. Mandela had to rein in on the ANC. He had to say, stop the violence, or we're not going to get, the sort of South Africa we want. You can find examples all over the world. Terrorism does not work. Sure, it can hurt, it can terrorize, that's the point. But this also applies, it isn't just about Irish nationals, it also applies to certain left-wing Brits who again think they're informed about this situation. And they're not from Northern Ireland, and they obviously didn't suffer during the Troubles. But there's nothing romantic about what the IRA done, and there's nothing honourable or heroic about what they done. And one of the things that frustrates me most is most of the films that have been made about the Troubles have been from the Republican perspective, and just for once it would be good to show the IRA for what they were. I watched The Devil's Own recently with Brad Pitt and Harrison Ford. It's a good thriller. I'll admit that. It's good at what it does. It is a good thriller. But again, it's sort of the whole thing through the perspective of an IRA man, and all the British in the film are like completely callous, heartless individuals. Now, in the film, Harrison Ford's character kind of tries to, reform Brad Pitt, but you can tell where the sympathies of the film lie. And like I say, it's good at what it does. It's a thriller, but So many films about the Troubles do kind of gloss over or do show it from one side, and that pisses me right off. The fact that there's no balance there. And to Irish Americans who may be watching this, what I would say is you may have these romantic notions of your roots in Ireland, but you need to understand that whilst the US has been concerned about terrorism since 9/11, for decades Irish American groups were supporting a terrorist campaign to bomb the United Kingdom, to terrorize civilians in the United Kingdom. This is the past. And I'm not trying to shit stir, I'm not trying to, you know, but I just think the problem is I say it's the past, but there are people that still have this mentality. Don't get me wrong, I know many decent Irish people. I'm not anti-Irish, but I am anti-stupidity, and I am anti-glorifying terrorism. 1996 at Arndale Centre in Manchester, dozens of civilians. Actually, I think the 96 attack, no one was injured. 1992, there was 2 attacks in Manchester. Um, but we're just talking about one incident after another after another. It would be like having a Westminster attack every few weeks. That's what it was like. And for what? They achieved not a damn thing. A lot of them have escaped justice due to the Good Friday Agreement. Anyway, I'll leave it there. That's all I want to say. The Troubles are over, but some of the ghosts of the Troubles, I think, haven't entirely been laid to rest now. I have to say, I personally never suffered. I didn't lose any relatives. I didn't personally suffer, but Northern Ireland's a small place, and when I see how certain people online present this, they have shit for brains, to be quite honest. I'm sorry to be blunt about it, but when I see, I wouldn't be half surprised if half of them are members of the real IRA, or at least sympathetic to it, because they're cards. They are cards. They use these Gaelic acronyms online, and they don't. No, not Gaelic. Excuse me, Irish. I'm thinking Scottish Gaelic. Excuse me, my mistake. But they use acronyms online. They'll never show their face. They're cards. They're cards defending terrorism. And you know what would be interesting if ISIS decided to attack Ireland for whatever reason, because pretty much every Western country is a target. Then these people would know what it feels like. Then maybe they'll think twice about defending terrorism. So let's just set the record straight. I get that the Troubles are over. I get that difficult decisions had to be made. But there was nothing heroic about what the real IRA done or what the provisional IRA done. They were terrorists. Pure and simple. And yes, so were the UVS, so was the LVS, so was those Lloyd's paramilitaries. What happened in Monaghan and Dublin was just as awful. But just for once, I would like to see an Irish Republican acknowledge it for what it was. I think, sadly, there's too many that don't. There are those who do, to be fair, but there's too many Irish Republicans who are still blinded by this. I remember when McGuinness died, there was this guy, I saw his profile, 22 years old. Way too young to understand the terror that the likes of McGuinness inflicted on so many people. Praising McGuinness as an Irish freedom fighter. Anyway, I'll leave it there. I could go through every single attack that they went through, but I won't. I won't. I am blocking comments on this video on the grounds that I don't want it to be swamped with these little Celtic warriors praising a terrorist organization. Not on my channel. It disgusts me, to be quite frank, and what I tend to do when I get into conversations with people from the Republic, I try to avoid these issues unless I'm absolutely certain of what their ideology is. It's best avoided because I don't want the confrontation. But on my channel, this is how I feel about it. I'll leave it there. Thanks for watching.